Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for staying to this very end after a very long day. I'd like to start by saying that I was very gladdened when I heard from Mr. Nguyen Chien Thang that the industry in Vietnam cares about the changes that they are causing in the countries that supply to them. And it's about nearly more than 2 decades that we have been talking about how to continue to use wood while sustaining the forests and the resources. So we have heard of efforts in the past about improving governance, improving law enforcement in the countries in the tropics, because let's be honest, there have been some challenges caused by illegal logging, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. So it's not because you have people protesting outside your factory and things like that, but it has come to the point that many countries are aware that in consuming timber, they should not sort of like set their footprint in other countries. And very simply, people are concerned about traceability and where the resources they use are coming from. So not only because of health reasons, but because of the very concern we have for our sustainable future. So the EU and the US, they are the most lucrative markets for timber, and they are concerned that this illegal timber or timber from very badly managed forests are coming into the supply chain and entering their market. So it was in 2003 that the EU came up with the FLEGT Action Plan, Forest Law Enforcement, Governance and Trade. So in the early 20s, in the late 90s, there was this thing called FLEG, Stopping at Governance. So efforts were made to improve governance in tropical timber countries. Money was pumped in to help with governance and to build capacity while respecting the sovereignty of those countries. But such efforts did not bring very much changes because it's a big global challenge. The world trade is complicated, and timber certification efforts were also very laudable, but they were patchy and did not help very much to bring the efforts to address these global challenges. So what the EU and US have done, and also some other developed countries, is to put in some legislation and to also use the market mechanism. That's why the T is there, trade. So to use the market mechanism to try and address these global challenges and these the sourcing of irresponsible timber. So the EU Action Plan is a mix of having a new legislation, negotiating voluntary partnership agreements, or actually trade agreements with supplier countries, so that the supplier country puts in place a system to ensure that the timber that they sell to the EU is from a verified legal source. So the new mechanism is legality verification. So it helps to the EU consumer or the US consumer to know and be assured that the timber they consume has not caused a forest in another country to be lost forever. So also in the EU member states, they are encouraging procurement policies. Even businesses themselves are saying we will only buy from sources which are verified legal. EU member states themselves, there are 27 of them, some of them have come up with government procurement policies stating that they will only buy from legal sources. So the aim is to eliminate trade in illegal timber. So what does this new timber regulation mean? So this timber regulation in the EU has actually been approved last year in October, and it prohibits the placing of illegally harvested timber. It requires that the EU trader, not you who are exporting to the EU, but the EU trader, to ensure that he has exercised due diligence, he has done some homework to ensure that the risk of bringing in illegal timber is minimal. So that's what the whole EU timber regulation is about. EU timber trader, you can bring in timber, but please make sure that you have checked, you have taken the risk assessment to ensure that the risk of bringing in illegal timber is minimal. And then if some timber were to be imported into the EU and another person processes it into maybe a musical instrument, the second person would have to ensure that he keeps proper records. That's what the EU timber regulation is about. And first, the operator must have information. So if he is buying from India, for example, he would want to ask India, where have you bought this timber from, if the timber is imported into India, or if it's from these agroforestry communities, proof to this EU trader that you have the proper records to show that the timber is legal, it has complied with the laws in India, for example. So what is important is the EU trader must know the forest of harvest. So in the past, we had countries buying from Myanmar, for example. They will process it in a third country, and then the certificate of origin will say it's from the third country. But with the EU timber regulation, you would have to provide, the EU trader would have to provide information of the country of harvest, so which in this case would be Myanmar. And then this operator has to assess the risk of this timber coming in. Is it a very complicated supply chain with many dealers along the line? So how do you sort of address this risk? So you mitigate the risk by requiring additional information or by some sort of verification. So the EU timber operators would be looking at three things. First, if the the exporting country and the EU, they have signed a voluntary partnership agreement, which is a binding legal agreement stating that the timber that is brought to the EU has gone through a legality system in the country of export. That means the government backs this timber. The timber is verified legal already. So as I've explained, the new instrument is legality verification. So if there's a partnership agreement, the timber that comes from this country which has exported to the EU would be automatically assumed to be legal. And then there would be private sector initiatives like forest certification and VLOs, verification of legal origin, and other means. So the important thing is, I've simplified it like this. First, you bring the timber into the EU. You say it is legal. If the authorities can prove that it is illegal, there would be prosecution of the EU timber importer, the first person or the first company that places the timber on the EU market. If the timber is not from a country which has signed a VPA and the importer has provided good evidence of legality, the authorities would look at the timber, and if they are satisfied that the documents are there to reduce the risk and to show the country of harvest, then the timber will be let in. And I explained just now that if it is a FLEGT or coming from a VPA country that has signed an agreement with the EU, it would have the green lane. So that's a simplified version. So you wonder, what are the products that would be covered under this timber regulation that would come into force in March 2013? So it includes all timber products, solid wood products, but India exports a lot of artifacts and a lot of handicrafts. If they are handicrafts, they are exempt for the time being. So would be books, magazines, and newspapers. So that's good news for you who are exporting to the EU. But by 2015, 2 years after 2013, the EU would be reviewing the regulation and the product scope could be amended. And so you would say, wow, that's a trade barrier. But this regulation applies to people and exporters within the EU 27 member states. So timber that is produced domestically would also be affected. And I very quickly show you this one, showing the coverage of the products under the EU timber regulation. So things like shoe trees, umbrella handles, clothes hangers, handicrafts, they would be exempt. So the EU has embarked on voluntary partnership agreement negotiations, and so far 6 countries, they have signed voluntary partnership agreements with the EU. So it means that there have been efforts at capacity building. So within the country, the government has to sort of like hold stakeholder consultations to come to an agreement with the stakeholders on what legality means. And then a timber legality assurance is put in place. So these 6 countries, they are 6 of them have signed. It doesn't mean that immediately they can supply verified legal timber. What it means is that they are on the process of being able to supply this legally verified timber. So countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia has actually signed, sorry about that. And some of the other countries, they are negotiating so that they can be ready in time for the EU timber regulation by 2013. So now this is to recap. Last year, the timber regulation entered into force. By June 2012, there would be a detailed secondary legislation that would tell you exactly how the regulation would be implemented. And by March 2013, the regulation would be operational. So where am I from? I'm from this Asia office of the European Forest Institute facility that supports the EU in looking into the effects of these regulation and informing all these countries in Asia that this new regulation is coming up. Please be prepared. So right now, India is not in that list. China is, Laos, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia. So we have been here for about a week now talking to Indian government, including Ministry of Environment and Forests, and talking to the industry, looking at the scope of not only giving good advice, but also maybe building capacity for India and for those companies which want to continue to export to the EU. So with that, I have finished my presentation on the EU timber regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Abdullah.